to the leadership course for session 6. So this is the 6th and one more to go. I think it's all been very successful. So thank you very much for all your participation. So over the last session, we covered jury assessor's role. Bernie did a great job filling in on what we do here in Australia for jury assessors. And I went over the Secretary's PowerPoint template, which is now on the website. Look, anyone can pull that PowerPoint down, modify it and use it however they want, if they want to use that. So all 5 sessions are now back on the website. I'll stop telling you about the stats because I think people have been tuning in and doing all the right things. And another thank you to Peter for getting session 5 up. Just for those who haven't actually viewed any of them online yet, all you have to do is go to the APF website, look for support, go down to training. When you select the training button, then each of the sessions are put there. And just below the sessions are also the notes or PowerPoint presentations, which you can download yourself as well. So this session, we're going to be covering the FIP Commission with Ian McMahon. Next fortnight will be the last of the Zoom session. So I think you guys will be zoomed out by then, and we'll be covering confidentiality in the jury. And I'll be covering the role of the assistant's secretary assistant. Now, Bernie may or may not do the confidential in jury. We just may change the speaker on that, but we'll let you know in a fortnight's time. I'm just doing another plug for the Bangladesh 50th anniversary of Bangladesh virtual exhibition. They've extended the entry date to the 30th of October. It's a FIP show, so any recognition will be for FIP. And I'm chasing more entries from Australia, so please get in contact me if you're interested. And of course, I tried to find a nice picture of Ian, and of course it's with the lovely jury in Canberra, and I'm not too sure what year that was, but the late Ross Woods was there, so everyone's smiling and having a good. I think that's Tim in the background as well. So I will now stop sharing and hand it over to you, Ian.
Okay. You'll have to turn on participant sharing.
Doesn't it stay default? Advanced sharing. All participants. How's that?
Oh, that's better.
Yep.
Much better. He's one of the few that admit.
It's a bit like radio with silence is deafening, right? So.
Yeah. Just try again. We'll try again. There we go. Okay, so the aim of this is to give you a brief update on things what are happening with FIP. Certainly, we have the president of FIP here who can add to the discussion, and I may call upon some people to comment on what's going on. In particular, I was going to just have a quick run through of the FIP commissions. Many people here know them very well, but we do have some judges who may not be as familiar with what happens internationally. In particular, I'll then go on to talk briefly about the harmonisation project of shrevs, more of guidelines than shrevs itself, but and then the general discussion about revision of shrevs, a brief comment on judges' responsibility in terms of keeping up to date and making sure that the correct rules are actually being used at exhibitions. And just to complete the picture, have a brief discussion of national rules and the FIP Commission website project. So the FIP has as part of its structure a number of what are called commissions, or in one case sections, although has that actually been changed, Charles? Anyway, the Astro has been known traditionally as a section rather than a commission. The ones on the left are the current commissions: aerophilately, literature, maximaphilately, postal history, postal stationery, etc. And they relate to the rules that we use and the classes that we use at FIP. In addition to these, FIP has plans to have a new commission for open, and hopefully one day there'll be one for postcards as well.
Oh, it's a nice one.
But the traditional commissions are listed on the left. And this is just a statement from the statutes that relate to the FIP commissions and what they're meant to do. So they're the technical organs of FIP. The duties of the commissions, first of all, to develop and promote interest in their special fields. So Aerophilately Commission will promote aero, obviously, and the same with all of the other commissions. And then they establish the rules and procedures, which for the most part relate to the exhibiting rules that we all know and use. Australia has a policy that once a FIP class is established as a FIP class and the rules are approved, and the FIP rules apply at national level for that class. And I'll come back to that when I talk about the national rules. Other things there, to prepare brochures to explain their special fields. Well, I know a couple of years ago, the Postal Stationery Commission did just that, and they were circulated. The next one, I'm not sure happens a great deal, to translate everything, it says, in the official FIP languages. Sometimes that happens, but obviously you need people with a broad range of skills to be able to do that through all of the documents. To publish news in the FIP magazine called Flash, and on their websites. Each commission has in it a delegate from each member country, potentially. Every country is entitled to nominate a delegate. The commissions have to meet every second year, usually at the FIP Congress, or if not at a world exhibition. They can meet in what's called a conference, that is a formal meeting between the congresses if they wish and they get FIP approval. But they can meet any time to run at various exhibitions to run workshops and seminars, or have an informal meeting. Every commission has a committee who are responsible for, if you like, running the commission. It's called a bureau, and it includes a chair, a secretary, ordinary bureau members representing the 3 continental federations, and the chair has the ability to appoint some additional members. Australia has, considering its population in the world, it currently has more people in the bureaus than I think any country. And I know there are a number of people on the bureaus and commissions who are with us tonight, and you're more than welcome to fill in any details as we work through. I'm wasn't intending to go through all of the changes by any means in all of the different classes, but mainly to talk on well, 3 themes, if you like. So this is the web page where you find the rules. It's a little confusing at the moment, actually, in a way, and the reason for that is, if you just look quickly at it, you can see that there are a lot of commissions that have, and therefore classes that have, new rules that are waiting for approval at the next FIP Congress, which is currently scheduled for next year in Jakarta, where there'll be Congress, and there should be commission meetings and elections for members of the Bureau. So at the moment, we're still using the old rules that predate 2018. Our practice with the APF has been that once the new rules are approved by the FIP Congress, then we start using the new rules at any show that opens its competition after that date. So we don't, if the new rules were approved today, Canberra is already out there in terms of its competition being open to people under the old rules, and it would be, well, it's an unusual year, but it'd be Wellington, where, I know that's New Zealand, but an exhibition that came up in the middle of next year that hadn't started its competition would use the new rules. Besides the rules that have come out of the commissions, there are rules for open, modern philately, which affects many of the classes, and one frame, which affects all of the classes except youth. I think, yes, that's right. And there are experimental rules, that is, experimental rules, the FIP tries out a class before it adopts it formally. And so one frame and open have gone through that sort of experimental process, and picture postcards are now in the experimental process. And the rules there can differ between exhibitions until, there are formal FIP rules. But this is just a list of the main commissions and their shrevs and guidelines that was on the previous slide, with a few things added. And as you can see, they're almost all being revised. Postal stationery, I expect that the revision would start next year. Certainly, that would be my view of what should happen. And literature has got, I believe, a call for expressions of interest to help change the literature guidelines. But Aero, Maximately, postal history, revenues, thematics, traditional, and I'm not sure about Astro. I think Charles can comment. They're all got revisions.
Yeah, there's a revision there for 2022.
Sorry?
And hopefully it'll be sorted out at London or at the next Congress.
Yes. So almost all of them were meant to have been sorted out in 2020, but are now going to the 2022 Congress. And one of the reasons for this was back in 2018, the FIP Commissions put forward a proposal to FIP that there'd be a harmonisation project of guidelines. And a group was set up to start doing that work. Sorry, the proposal was Finlandia in 2017 and 2018 in Prague. They had further discussions of it and drafts. The aim of the exercise was to put the guidelines onto a common structure. And so where it talked about title page, everyone talked about the same thing the same way. That doesn't mean to say that the differences between the classes weren't being recognised. What it was saying that where they were really talking about the same things, then they would use the same words and the same structure to do it. And in addition to this process, some of the other shrevs and guidelines were subject to a much more radical change because of what was going on in the commissions themselves. But to start with the harmonisation, the very first start of it was when Lars Peter produced this document, which is a comparison on the left of what traditional guidelines currently say, what the postal stationery guidelines currently say, and what he was proposing for the words for the traditional. Don't worry about the detail here. The point is simply that to a large extent, because Lars Engelbrecht had revised the postal stationery guidelines relatively recently at that point, Lars Peter and the other people in the project chose to go to a large degree with what was already in the postal stationery guidelines. So the proposal for new traditional introduction is on the right. It follows very similar way to the stationery. And then you work through it, and on the right, you've got the introductory sheet, or what you call the title page, and you'll see that whereas the old or the current traditional rules talk about the introductory statement describing the story, etc. Now you've got the introductory sheet saying that you have to include the introductory sheet rather than the title page, and it, what should be on it, the title of the exhibit and a description of the purpose, the scope, etc. That's already in the postal stationery rules, and the traditional ones were designed to reflect that. And so it went through. There's also now inclusion of one frame exhibits at FIP are meant to be judged by teams of judges from the class concerned, which is different to the original way when it was an experimental class. Again, it's just a matter of seeing that there's an attempt to bring the two sets of guidelines into line with each other, and this then this then extended to other classes as well. So you take the aero title page description, which is on the list. All aero philatelic exhibits must include an introductory sheet or title page, and you'll see that the wording is very similar to what is used in traditional and stationery. That is the primary reason why many of the guidelines were being changed and why there are so many. But it wasn't the only reason, in that some classes and thematics and revenues are two of the classes where the guidelines were revamped to a very large degree. So yes, there's some elements of harmonization, but then there are lots of different other changes as well. This is the summary that Stephanie has given us about the changes to the new thematic guidelines. Clarification on appropriate material, dealing with borderline items, concept of story. I don't know, Daryl, do you want to make any comment about the major changes to the revenue guidelines?
Yeah, the changes have been rather significant in that they're trying to make revenues a much bigger type of class, so that there's actually three aspects to it. There'll be traditional type approach where you study the stamps. There'll be a postal history type approach where you actually look at the development of rates and all this type of thing. And there'll be a third section which relates to almost a social history aspect of it. So it's become much broader than just the traditional approach of putting stamps on a page and having a few documents. So it should be good once it gets going.
Yes. And I noticed that there's a proposal on the literature site for a revision of the literature guidelines. Jeff, do you know anything about these?
No, I don't. No. I'm not a member of the.
Sorry, wrong person.
Yes.
No.
Wrong, Jeff. Yes.
All right.
There is a national literature exhibition in New Zealand this year.
Yes.
And Norman is involved with that. And there's been some discussion about whether they use these revised version or whether they stick with the ones which are currently accepted, or whether we use, in some cases for the electronic version, whether we use the New Zealand version. So Norman should be able to comment on that, because I'm not on the jury for the literature exhibition in New Zealand this year.
David, I think, isn't it? David Collier.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about
Yes.
the revision to the literature?
No.
No, okay. So just commenting on the national rules, I've talked about how we adopt the FIP rules once they become accepted as a FIP class. So most recently open and one frame. But every country still has the right to use its own national rules for when it's judging nationally. Not all countries adopt the FIP rules as such. If you've judged in the US or Canada, you'll realize that they have their own judging manual with their own national rules. And if you want to have a look at it, both countries use the American rules, which are on the American Philatelic Society website, which I've given the web link at the bottom of the page. Australia, though, while it doesn't make many, it does make a few modifications to FIP rules for various purposes, most recently to the one frame rules to clarify what's meant by, what penalties should be applied if we don't think the exhibits are truly one frame exhibits, and also to allow for youth one frame entries in a one frame competition. And over the years, we've made changes to the youth rules as well. In particular, in the old days when you couldn't get a gold medal in the youth, we made an amendment so that you could at national level. These are relatively small in a way, but they're still important for judges to know that we can and do that.
Got the first one.
What happens in New Zealand? You have a New Zealander who can tell us what happens in New Zealand?
I'll lead that, or do you want someone else to? But it's a similar approach, Ian. We make minor modifications to the rules to suit our needs.
And then I'm sure you, and I know you do as well, with the following comment, that we do then have classes that we have only at national level, including Cinderella's, Polars, First Day Covers, Frugal, currently postcards, although we've now seen that elevated to FIP Experimental, and Topical. And one of the important things to note is that if you're on a team with an Accord judge, or particularly if you're secretary or chair of the jury, you need to be aware that Accord judges coming from both countries be used to using the rules that apply in their country, as well as the tradition and style of how they judge. You need to be aware of that. You need, in some cases, to point out or even give them copies of the Australian rules and say, well, this is the rules that we use here. And similarly, if you're an Australian Accord judge going overseas, it's wise to be aware of some of these differences before you arrive. And clearly, if you went to judge in the US or Canada, you would read their judging manual. And you'll find things quite different, and you'll find things like illustrated male class and various other things that you might not have heard of. But that's why we send Accord judges over in many cases, to get experience of a broader experience. So just as in any profession, we expect our doctors and dentists and lawyers to keep up with what's going on. We clearly expect our judges to do the same. It's maybe tempting. No one likes reading the rules. They can be difficult to interpret. But the rules do change. And as you can see, they're about to change across almost all classes, if not all classes, over the next few years. And you need to read what the new rules say. You need to know what rules you are actually using for that exhibition. And if in doubt, then talk to the chair or secretary. In many ways, though, reading rules isn't enough. And the other way you find out about the rules and how they're interpreted, and in fact, the interpretation is ultimately becomes quite important, is to participate in training sessions like this, but also the various training sessions that are held in international exhibitions. The more you can visit exhibitions and have discussions with other people in the same class, the more you start to understand some of the issues that are coming up. I know in postal stationery, the biggest issue is always seemed to be that people keep trying to include things in the class that are not postal stationery and not in press postage stamps. But there are a lot of borderline issues that elicit lots of discussion. But it really does help to be out there, being involved. And certainly the idea of the days when you could rock up to an exhibition and not have read the rules for 30 years is simply not a good way to go. next part of the talk was just a development that's happening at FIP at the moment. For many, many years, and I know there are people here who are directly involved in what I'm about to say, that the FIP commissions have all developed their own websites. They've all been done privately. They've all been paid for privately. They've come with many different styles. The FIP Postal Stationery Commission was one of the original ones, but it now has a very perhaps outdated style. The problem with doing things privately is that when the commission chair / secretary / webmaster changes, you may find yourself without a website almost immediately. And then you may find, if as chair or secretary, that you've suddenly been asked to develop a new website and to pay for it and whatever else. And that has happened. And you know, there've been commissions that have had very good websites where they now have nothing at all. So FIP has decided to bring them all onto the FIP website, which means that that side of it will be looked after by the FIP people who look after the FIP website. The domain names will be paid for and the hosting fees by FIP itself. But there will be some ability under the new arrangements to for each of the commissions, well, to put in their own content. That will still remain. One of the strange things we've had in the past with having commissions with separate websites is, well, you go to the FIP website and you get the set of rules down. You go to the commission website and you get a set of rules down, but they're different. And you've got no idea which one is right. And at least it's potentially we could have a definitive set of shrevs and guidelines when we have one website. It's still possible to have more than one, of course, but hopefully that won't happen. So this is not necessarily how it will look, but this is one of the templates that was sent round before we had our recent meeting. Each commission will have a uniform design. They'll have to be on the FIP domain, we call something like postalstationery.fip.ch for Switzerland. But each will be packed with information about the commission itself. The project to convert from current websites to the shared site has currently started. They're hoping everything is in English, which is good for us. The basic structure of the website has been done. It's in WordPress that some of us have some familiarity with, and Peter has a lot of familiarity with. And we had a 1-hour training session on Monday night, on the 11th, which seemed to go very well. It looks like a typical WordPress, although, Peter, they're using something called the Beaver Builder for the page building, which I haven't seen before. And the next part of the process is for the commissions to provide some information about how they want their sites customized, and then a transfer of content will occur hopefully before the end of the year, which is the plan. So I know a couple of people here attended that. Would anyone like to comment? Well, now you can all unmute yourself, because that's the last of the formal slides.
So you're asking for questions now, Ian?
Questions, discussions, comments. It can be about the website. It can be about anything to do with FIP. And just one thing I'll say, just happened the last day or so. The FIP Congress is coming up in Jakarta next year. FIP has Secretariat is starting the process of calling for reconfirming Bureau nominations for the commissions, and also delegates. The FIP has the provision that you can't appoint a delegate to a FIP Commission meeting just for that meeting. They have to be appointed beforehand. And so they've asked for a list of the delegates from here, which I've sent them. It's the same list that is in the APF contacts list, and was presented at the recent AGM. But we have a lot of FIP Commission delegates and Bureau members here, so if there are any additional comments about what FIP is up to, or if Bernie wants to say anything.
Yeah, I will. Bernie's actually asked the Revenue Commission to also start doing some work on Cinderellas. It's not because they're so much related, it's just thought that it'd be the easiest commission to actually start some work on it, and eventually it'll be completely separate. I doubt it'll be a separate commission, but everything's designed to be completely separate from revenues. But there's been very little work done to date, so it's something we need to get onto. I just sort of let people know that more and more things are coming into the FIP fold.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ian, I'll just make a comment on when Australia selects a commissioner to go overseas. If any or all the commissions are running training courses or a meeting, we do expect our commissioners to attend as many of those as possible and bring back notes for the various delegates. So when there's a Congress, of course, we expect the actually delegates to attend Congress. But when there's another World or a FIAP and there's a commission meeting, we do expect our commissioners to attend as many of those as possible. So that's just a blanket statement of our expectation on commissioners. The second thing, it's something that Mike Cowan and myself have been discussing, and it's something that I discussed with Gary Brown when he used to be on the traditional commission, in that this word plan is creeping into all the harmonisations. And, you know, when I first get an idea of what a plan, I think of thematics where they do a whole page and they bullet point everything, and that's what the structure's going to be. And when I spoke to Gary about it, he said, no, what we're trying to do is get people to sectionalise what they're doing, rather than saying frame one's this, frame two's this. You know, if you're doing 3 printers, then section 1 is that printer, section 2 is another. Is that how you and the other delegate chair read the word plan in each of the new harmonisation of the shreves?
It's how I would interpret it. If people wanted to do it that way, it makes sense. The 1 frame, 2 frame, I think, comes more from the old thematic plan, where you, at one stage you would sort of giving out all the page numbers and all that sort of thing. But I think it more makes sense to give your major chapter headings as your plan.
So I'm happy to say in a paragraph, you know, my chapter headings are going to be blah, 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 blah. But what I'm worried about is judges going, oh, I don't see a bullet point of this, this, and this. You don't have a plan. You lose a mark on presentation, or you lose a mark on treatment, or you know, like, that's my concern, is that word plan is not really described correctly, because a lot of people think plan, thematics, because that's what we used to.
That's right.
And I don't want to spend, you know, put bullet points on my title page. You know, my title page is quite precious. By the time I do the scope and what I'm trying to do, the treatment, the rarity statement and the references, I don't have any room to put, you know, 10 or 12 bullet points on this is how I'm going to sectionalize my thing. So I'm just concerned that the judges will just start looking at it and going, no, it says plan, don't have a plan.
So 2 things. The first thing is that if you go back to the intent of the exercise, if you look at so many title pages, even at Toowoomba, the basics of when you're a judge, what's the sort of the aim or scope or the purpose of whatever of the exhibit? What are they trying to do? And then how are they trying to do it? And they don't answer it. You get a description of a long description of the history or some other aspect. And so this is, I guess, a way of trying to make it clear to people that that's what they've got to do. I do accept, though, that plan could be misinterpreted in a more of a thematic style. I don't think that's the intent,
No.
but nevertheless, it could be interpreted that way. And a lot of judges will say, "Oh, you don't have a plan, and that's not good." But in some cases, it's shorthand for you don't have a plan. That is, you didn't tell us how you're going to treat this.
Yeah.
But I could see that some judges would become too finicky about it and insist on having something called a plan, and that follows your logical breakdown.
Yeah, but a good team leader would point that out.
A good team leader will point that out, and a good judge would realise that,
Yeah.
particularly I'm not talking about thematics here, where you get points for the plan itself, but for traditional postal station and revenues, I would think the main thing would be have the whole purpose of the exercise. Why are you doing this?
Mm.
The reason why you're doing it is so that you're making it clear what you're trying to do, how you're trying to do it. And there'd be some leeway in how you went about doing that, provided you did it.
Yeah, look, I thanks for that, Ian. I've listened to a couple of the Swedes give talks on title pages, and I wish they were recorded, because the way they do it, pretty much, here's the purpose, here's the scope, here's the treatment, they're the headings. So the judge knows straight away what's the treatment. Because
that's right.
I look at a title page and I'm going, I've read the whole thing. I have no idea.
No,
Yeah,
Is
no.
it traditional?
Okay.
Is it Astro? Is it postal? They have not told me how they're going to treat it.
No,
But they've told me a lot of good information. Don't
Yeah.
get me wrong. But the Swedes go, just tell it right, traditional. It's going to be chronological from from the purpose is because I want to show you my nice stamps. The actual scope, it's going to be from this year to this year, this reign to that reign. I mean, they just bullet point it like that, and straight away you know what that's going to be all
but
about.
that's what the new instructions are trying to do. Admittedly, it was done by Danes rather than Swedes,
Yeah,
but that's what they would like to achieve.
yeah.
And it's coming from a fact that so many title pages, even now, you've just got no idea what the exhibit's going to be about by reading the title page.
Well, after harmonisation, you can start setting out some title page seminars.
Yeah, I'm happy for someone to give a good title page seminar, but I would like either one of those Danes or Swedes, if they record it,
they do it
put it
well.
on our website, because they do it well.
But I think one of the big things, and I'm surprised that you haven't come up with this, Charles, but a thematic exhibit, what it tries to do with its title page is give a balance to the whole exhibit, which is what treatment's about. It indicates exactly how you balance the whole exhibit across all of the items that you've got. And that's the important aspect of any plan. Balance, and how you've actually treated the whole thing across the exhibit. What else can you have to do in a plan?
It's a sort of mini roadmap, as they now talk about.
And whether you do 5 decimal points or whatever in your plan, well, that's up to you, but I mean, you don't have to do that. One thing that has surprised me a little bit is that when you look at the FIP website and you see traditional and it says new, and I look at it, it doesn't look very new at all to me. It looks exactly the same as it was before. So
There are some problems with the current FIP website.
exactly, and I think that's part of the issue.
But trust me, there are a set of, and also there's shreds and guidelines. There are an old set of shreds and guidelines for traditional and a new proposed set.
Excellent. That's good. Likewise with thematic, what we have is apparently an amalgam of the shrevs and the guidelines in some sort of meld, which doesn't seem to quite tie in with what's being attempted.
Stephanie?
Sorry, I'm not supposed to be here, but I can.
But you're here now, so you can comment.
We took the aims, and I think, Ian, this is something you did leave out, but the aim of all commissions was ultimately, if possible, no longer to have a shreve.
Yes.
So
exactly.
most commissions tried to make it such that the new guidelines that they put out covered all that was in the shreve at the same time.
Yeah,
And so
I think-
therefore it is an amalgam, but definitely for that future aim.
Yeah, look, and I appreciate that, and I think that's so important that they've got that in mind. But the current thematic guidelines and shrevs and what have you do not seem to tie in with what we're aiming for at present. So they talk about it new, and it doesn't seem all that effective from that point of view. But no, I think the objective is fine, and we've got to work on that.
I think there is some politics involved when the commissions are saying the shrevs and the grevs really get approved by the FIP board. The commissions don't have any say in it. The guidelines, the commission can draft as much as it's possible. So I think what they're trying to do is sneak the shrevs into the guidelines and then put a motion to the FIP board to get rid of the shrevs. So that way there'll be the grevs and then there'll be the guidelines, and every commission then will have full control of the guideline. However, from what I gather from some of the FIP board members, they're totally against allowing that to happen. But anyway, maybe Bernie would like to comment on that, or maybe he can't comment on that like I can.
Sure. I think it's probably inappropriate to ask him, quite honestly, but that's one of those things.
Yeah. Well, you can ask.
I'll support what Glenn said, and one of the reasons why I didn't get into it was because of the politics behind it.
Yeah.
And the other reason was that, well, with the postal stationery, because it is not currently part of, there's not currently a revision occurring, the shrevs are definitely staying separate.
Sure.
I do know that there are actually a couple of minor inconsistencies between the shrevs and the guidelines. At some point, that they will need to be fixed either by bringing the shrevs into the guidelines or changing one or the other, or both.
I tell you, I'm sorry to be a nuisance, but one of the things that really does impress me is what APS has actually done with their general guidelines, their rules for judging and what have you. They've effectively said there's no such thing as classes anymore, and they're going across the whole board, and they're saying you should be able to judge any exhibit using these criteria, and no matter what it is, as long as it fits in a frame, it can be judged. And I think there's a heck of a lot to be said for that. And you just have a couple of chapters or a couple of paragraphs which actually describes what each particular type of exhibit might look like. And I think that's something that's worth thinking about. Sorry, I'm just going.
No, you raise a more general point, of course, which we quite sort of hinted at, but haven't really discussed, and that is the process of getting things changed.
Yeah.
Now, for various reasons, both political and pandemic related, these particular group of guidelines are going through a very torturous process to get approved. But oftentimes we have exhibitors who say, well, these things should be changed. Why doesn't the APF make these changes to the guidelines, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And part of our being represented on the commissions and on the bureaus is to be an active part of that process of developing the guidelines in ways that, for the good of the hobby generally, and ways which would be supported by Australia. But it's a matter of influencing. It's a matter of dealing with all the politics related with, however member countries the FIP has, and dealing with people where English is a second language, and they're often in charge of writing the guidelines, etc. And language is a real issue. I know the Spanish speakers in South America are not very happy with the postal stationery guidelines, but I can't for the life of me work out why not and what they'd like instead, because I don't speak Spanish. And I can try the Google translation and it makes no sense to me. I am hoping that our friend from Ecuador, Teddy, will at some point send me a translation of they're apparently writing, I'll say, a letter to FIP recommending some changes, but I don't know what they're going to propose, and what I've seen in Spanish, well, I can't understand. So Bernie may have some knowledge of it, but so you've got all of those issues, and some of the guidelines clearly were written in someone who, well, effectively in another language,
Bring back Esperanto.
Sorry, Esperanto. Well, that'd be good. None of us would understand it then.
But I think Bob, the real issue, FIP's a world organisation, 97 different countries, right? Now, when you go to the commission delegates, you look at their website. Typically, there's only about 30 countries that support each of those commissions. But still, to get 30 countries to agree on what should be a change. All right, the bureau might be a strong bureau and just make all the decisions, but I think most of them are fairly democratic and put it out to the delegates. And there's a lot of delegates that don't contribute and often take the title as delegate because it's prestigious. Because I think about 8 or 9 years ago, we had Mr. Costa Rica going to every commission saying that, half the South American commissions, delegates are dead, and it's about time they appoint someone new because a dead commissioner, delegate commission doesn't really report back to the countries, but the countries don't want to change the name because they're a well-respected person. So there's a lot more issues than that the APS is going to change the world, because even within the APS you should hear the conflict going on in one organisation. So I think that's why it's always a slowly approach, and while it's frustrating for both exhibitors and jurors, I think in a world organisation that's all you can do.
Oh, indeed. And I think one of the big things, you talk about the Australian presence at commissions and what have you, but I think, when you look at the Australasian,
absolutely,
I think it's huge. So I think that's really great.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I?
There you go, Dingle.
It was really raising a slightly different issue that we have touched on before in these Zoom meetings, and that's the role of Synopsis. Now, in Australia, when it came up once in the earlier meeting, seemed to think that if people sent in a synopsis with their entry form in Australia, it didn't go anywhere. I noticed in on the website, the APF website for picture postcards, that it specifically says, you're kind of prompted to actually send in a synopsis. And I'm actually appear to be one of the few people who's in favour of Synopsis. I quite like it because you can add material, say I've changed this a bit since last time. You can do more things with rarity that I find difficult to put in an actual exhibit. But I wondered how the various commissions looked on the use of Synopsis, and particularly since it's specifically mentioned in the one with picture postcards.
I'll just start off by saying that in my experience at FIP level, I'm not sure I've ever seen a synopsis. No. That may be a bit hard, but certainly they're very uncommon. They haven't been discussed in the Postal Stationery Commission. And some exhibitions at FIP level do these days allow you to send one in, and I assume if that's the case, it may be sent to the judge. But it hasn't been a practice to do so.
Yeah, my query was really twofold. One was drawing attention to the fact that it's specifically mentioned in, I guess, the draft guidelines. The second was really, obviously they're very widely used in the United States.
Well, required. They're actually required. Canada and the US.
It's a setup in Australia where I get the impression that if they're sent in, they're not always actually passed on to the judges. It's got to that kind of level, and I wonder what you and others thought about that.
Well,
if they send them, should get them.
Yeah. No, they're not required. The Australian attitude in the past has been that the exhibit's judged by what's in the frames, and that the synopsis isn't necessary, and if anything, particularly in some of the American ones, is a distraction. And because they're not required, it wouldn't then be fair to send them those few that you did get around to the judges when you got nothing from other people.
So far.
I've got a slightly different question.
A couple of exhibitions that I've judged at, has been, I have received synopsis.
We've had them here.
Yeah, if the exhibitor has put in a synopsis, as a judge, I have received a synopsis for that exhibit.
Yeah, I mean, I personally would like to think that's the view. I'd like to see them kept to one side of a piece of paper, but I actually think there are quite useful things. I know that, you know, it tends to be this feeling in America, people are writing, although American journals spend a lot of time discussing how to write a synopsis, there's a feeling in Australia that it's kind of a self-promotion and isn't useful. It's not actually my kind of view. I think things can be said in it, and it'd be nice if one knew as they were submitted that they were sent around. And the FIP class the FIP situation is different, except that just for the problem of it's actually mentioned in picture postcards, I thought I'd bring it up.
Yes, Dingle, I'd like to speak on this too. I'm very much in favour of the idea of a synopsis, particularly when it's not a simple subject. And when I do a synopsis on the title page, I make it very, very clear. Please see the attached synopsis. On the synopsis, please see the attached top title page, just in case we have somebody not just sending the title page. And if you really do want to put a synopsis, make sure you cross-reference it there so in case it doesn't get sent, somebody can follow it up.
That sounds very sensible. Yes.
Having written my first synopsis recently for a Canadian virtual exhibition, I looked at the various instructions of which there are an awful lot on the web as templates of synopsis pages in the US and the like. And most of them seem to be saying that it was a 2-page version of the title page with the same heading. And yes, that means you could say a lot more. In a difficult subject, you could say a lot more, have a lot more introductory stuff. You could give more references. But I had trouble telling the two apart. Other than one, you could say a lot more, and the other was succinct.